Give us our countdown tech. It says 5 seconds. I think 5 seconds. Go.
Whoa.
Alrighty, everybody. Welcome to our How to Print a Comic, a Prepress panel with Joan Zahra Dark, Carina Taylor, and Joan Mardikian. What a great welcome to Nib and Ink Fest, all of you. Thank you for coming here. So let me go ahead and yay,
Wonderful.
thank you. So let me go ahead and introduce you guys. Joan Zahra Dark is a writer, interdisciplinary artist, and founding organizer of the Cartoonist Cooperative. Yay! They love talking about queer comics, the importance of worker cooperatives, and why we all want to kiss and or be robots. Carina Taylor is a Filipina American designer born and raised in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Currently, however, she lives in Brooklyn, where she designs for an array of comic and graphic novels publishers. Formerly at Skybound, Silver Sprocket, and Scholastic Graphics, Carina is now, very newly, the art director of Inklore. Congratulations! Penguin Random House's manga imprint. Carina loves bright color and interesting shape design, and in her personal time loves to bake pies and discuss anime with her friends. Thank you, Carina. And Hovannes Hai Mardikian is a 32-year-old trans mask Armenian book designer, editor, tea liker, and TIFF wrangler, pre-press manager for Iron Circus Comics by day and Tranquility Press typesetter by night. They're the EIC of a Seattle-based micropress, Fortuna Media, that hosts the Almost Real Zine series in the 18-plus Book of Shadows art book line, seeking to create cohesive, collaborative works that give worthy frames to the art that graces his hard drive experience. Thank you all for being here, and take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to everybody on the tech side, everybody helping to keep this panel running. My name is Joan Zahra Dark. I will be your moderator for How to Print a Comic, pre-press panel. Really excited to be talking to y'all, Carina and Hai. I wanted to quickly start by asking both of you about some of the most common questions or assumptions both of you get when you're working with artists on designing their books.
Yeah. I guess the number one thing that's sort of like overarching is that you need to think about print from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Even if you think you'll never print your comic, just set it up in such a way that if you have to, it will not be a complete nightmare for your future self. So, use a template, keep your files consistent, and be proactive. And if you are working with like a team of people, ask for those things, even if they're like not offered to you, because they can be. Everything can be made easier for you.
Yeah, everything can be made easier, and also like it helps the rest of the process too. Like Karina, you were saying, it's important to know the base rules before you try and break them. So that can apply with anything, like basic color, settings and profiles. Like even if you're going straight from something like a screen friendly display, like what people do with webcomics, typically RGB, as you're creating a page, run that tester. It's like, hey, what do these colors look like after I exchange them? What does my bleed look like? How will this fit on a page if I'm going to consistently draw in this size? So because a lot of times, even what I encounter a lot for a question is that people will automatically go for like the most detailed questions rather than covering any of the basics. They're like, okay, so this color profile, do I need to have like this, specific channel set? Like, what are my ink levels? It's like, if anything, I appreciate that they're asking those questions because they have seen, either that in somebody else's experience or, some sort of previous experience they may have encountered, even if not directly, but always starting with the basics of your printing building blocks, like colors that you're going to stick with, DPI, which we'll get into later on. But yeah, very, very essential to have your main blocks like page templates, basic ideal ideas of what your colors are going to look like. So, like, if you're going to be printing this comic, don't stick with a neon green that only shows up on your displays without the assistance of something like Riso or screen printing or spot color. So, but yeah, I think that's, I don't know. I've encountered some really interesting questions during my time as a pre-press. I don't know. How about you both? What's some of the more like wild, like when people are first getting started off on a project?
I mean, I'm actually curious for you. Like, I'm always telling people work at size with a higher DPI rather than working at like a lower DPI at like double size or whatever, like larger size. Because I've always found that when people then go to like the smaller size that they're actually printing at, the ratios are never actually correct.
Yeah, and then you got to play like the wizards in like those paintings who were balancing out like the DPI versus the actual image size, and we're doing some alchemy over here.
Yeah, so I'm always telling people like it's different if you're working, I think traditional, which case you should work at a larger size because that makes sense. But if you're working fully digitally, I'm like, okay, if you're going to print something at like 6x9, just work at 6x9 and then, draw your pages at like 600 DPI.
Yeah, or just basic like constrain in like your, and this is a PSA for all attendees and people here. This conversation may or may not be littered with things of it depends, less because of us just having different, approaches to our workflow, but truly every book is different. No two projects are the same in any sort of field we've encountered. Like, even if you have, projects where you encounter like where they are start off given a template, the way that those final files can be delivered to you can be astronomically different than what you were given initially. So, and that's not said out of, disdain or any, it's just everybody has a different process. And one of the fun parts about this job is having a very unique look into how certain creatives either have like their workflow or what works best for them as they are, gearing up to hand something off to pre-press people.
That's actually another thing. Like, always communicate, especially for you digital artists, what programs you are using. And normally we'll ask. However, if you're using multiple things or if you're using one thing and we know we're going to have to take your file and put it into something else, just we'll have a whole conversation about it. Like, I actually was just dealing with something literally yesterday where an artist draws fully in Procreate and then thinking, oh, my final file should be in CMYK, so I'll just convert those to CMYK before delivering, a converted Photoshop file. But then I received that not knowing that they were in Procreate, that the colors are all messed up.
Oh no.
So it's just you need So I was like, just keep it in RGB. I'll handle the color conversion for you.
Yeah, but I will also start off this conversation. I very highly caution people against doing like big batch actions for your pages. If you haven't done like, any sort of like part of your process where that this can definitely work for a book, batch conversion in Bridge just will not cut it, or like any sort of like mass like implication of CMYK, because your colors are just going to look so different than what you may have started with if you're just thinking. It's easier for all of us just to give native files, and that's not a knock on your own process or any like lack of faith of your skill or anything, because you are the artist who is making this book. And it is our job as pre-press people to ensure that that translates to a printed medium. So it's
yeah, basically
that,
our job in a nutshell is like to allow you more time to draw, and that's like really fundamentally
exactly.
something I believe in, is that
Yeah.
we're helping you so that you have more time to not worry about this bullshit that is percolating in our minds all the time.
Yeah, really.
Mhm.
Every day I wake up and think about pixels.
So many little pixels. That's very super important to make sure, yeah, that folks are just communicating what are you drawing in.
Yeah.
And yeah, I should say up top, because I didn't say it earlier, obviously, talking about all these different techniques, we have a few questions lined up that we'll get into, like some of the specific process and what some examples have been of pre-press for Carina and High. Like has been said, it depends. And there will be a little bit of time for Q&A at the end for folks if folks have specific questions about like, you know, the actual like how-tos of printing. I don't think we're going to get into too much of that in this, and like instructionally speaking,
Yeah.
but can definitely provide you some guidance on what to do or what not to do. And we'll let you know when Q&A is coming up. But with that in mind, talking about process and batch conversions, because both of you have this experience sending books to print at a commercial scale and working with a bunch of different commercial printers, I would love to hear about your process when it comes to prepping files from artists, depending on the as general as you can make it.
Yeah, I mean, like we've been saying, it kind of starts with a conversation, a meeting of some type of being like, okay, well, and hopefully this is all best case scenario. This has happened before you've drawn anything.
Yeah.
But usually not, well, maybe kind of depends. It depends.
Yeah, it depends.
You'll have a conversation. You've drawn everything already. There should be a conversation at some point with your pre-press person or designer or whoever. We will receive your files and make a book file in InDesign, typically. At least that's how it is for me. InDesign is my program of choice. But yeah, I typically, I have hopefully all your files are the same size, relatively speaking, and I can make a super easy parent page, drop an example spread in, remove the art element, and then very quickly I'm able to place all the artwork for like a 200-page graphic novel in 15 to 30 minutes, kind of depending on a bunch of factors. And then after that, do several checks of various kinds, checking the safety in the gutters and the bleeds, double checking the DPI, double checking all the colors, looking at everything just to make sure like it's meeting like the specifications of print.
Yeah, similar process with me. Usually in like my pre-contracted, like of my main contractor, I just get files like as I go, like by job, and kind of diagnose them from there. If I'm working with individual clients, typically what I'll do is, but as we're first of all, it's always very important as a pre-press person to understand what exactly you're getting into, to avoid task creep later on, because sometimes there's a process or part of the book that needs done that the artist is not even initially aware of. Not for any lack of, ill preparedness on their sense. It's just they do not realize that this is also a factor that goes into the process of the book, depending on whatever printer they have or is required by the publisher. So typically what I do with individual clients is I will take, I'll very clearly like define like what it is they need done on the book. Do you need any, like I'll straight up ask them, do you need any editorial review? Do you need any proofreading done? Is there text that you want, like, do you want this to remain in the layered file, or do you want this on Photoshop or done in Illustrator? which again, most prepress people unfortunately are attached to the wonderful glut that is Adobe InDesign. Little InDesign, I say, sweating and crying. So I usually will just very clearly indicate like what it is they need done, and not even out of like a laundry list I want to make. It's also like to understand what, so the artist or client understands what it is that I am doing. So they're not, either surprised by the amount of time a project takes, or if there's something else that they may need revision or like questions that I have for them on. So it's very clearly defining that. And then typically what I'll do for freelance commissioners is I have a consultation fee where they give me, I request 10 pages from a wide variety of the work, so if it's like, say, like a 240 page graphic novel, I'll be like, all right, send me 10 pages of a wide enough either color balance or just how the book looks for me to look at the pages exactly and see what I'm getting into. And I charge a small, initial diagnosis fee for that, just to get them as pre-press ready as possible, like based on what I know of their required printers is items. And then from there is what I base my rate off of, because from there I can see, okay, does this person need their text treated from rich black to 100K? Does this person do they want all their layers cleaned up, or are they cool with just, having things as is and then popping it into a pre-press document? So it's always better for both of us just to make sure we know how much work is exactly going into a book before anything starts, because not only does it save you from the unfortunate task creep that sometimes pre-press can be burdened with, but also it's a good way for the client to understand like how much work does go into this part of the process. And if anything, it helps them fortify, them further down the line of like, oh, okay, I know Hi said that they had to do this, so now I can reinforce my files before I have to pass them off, again, to have this ready for them. So it makes that transfer process, handing off, it cuts down my amount of work, and it makes them more knowledgeable about how to approach the pre-press process. So it's just a very much like clearly defining, what am I doing on this book? What do you want done? What is something you might want to have done, and then get back to me. So again, like Carina said, very much a dialogue per artist or per author.
And that actually brings up like a sort of a good point for like how I think of my job, kind of like depending on the mode I'm in, like i.e. like commercial printing mode versus like small press mode versus like independent mode, and how I have like different internal like standards that I'm like kind of considering when I'm like talking to someone about like what is actually going to be useful and like affordable for someone. So like when I'm in commercial mode, it's like, okay, well, they want it to be as perfect as possible and they can afford it, and the time is unlimited. So
the world's your oyster.
We'll do everything. So like then that is like that kind of printing versus like if I'm like freelancing with someone independently, they might just have flattened files and you're like, and we're going to do the best we can with what you have. And it's okay that your text is going to be 4-color. I'm not going to worry about it because it's not going to make a huge difference, but you'll know in the future that it should be a separate layer and it should be 100K only. But it's just, if your files aren't perfect, I think you should always still print them, because the learning process is so important to like, getting a feel of what feels right for your personal visual aesthetics. And sometimes things that aren't like technically perfect can still look good within the context of like your story. So that's something I want to be like very clear about. Like there's a lot of things that are like the right way, but also kind of depends on like what is right for your story and like your ability level and budget.
Yeah. Like it's like you said, it's, Lord knows I learn something new every time I do a book. It's a constant, much like comics, in any sort of illustrative capacity, it is very much a not completely learn as you go, because there's definitely some building blocks you need to make sure you understand and are aware of before you enter, a professional atmosphere. But I always like to say, every day I learn something new. And that can apply, either with like people getting a book back and being like, oh, so this is the difference between, seeing like rich black text versus rich black text that is from a font versus like rich black text that's something like hand lettered, or because sometimes like even 100K text that's hand lettered can look very different than like rich black, and it's literally just because like the way that the fonts are either hand lettered or implemented by a program. So never think that, like, you want, ideally a book is as perfect, as you are able to make it, and not saying that we are free from error by huge margins or anything, but it's definitely like a conversation in terms of the technical side and design language of it. So like any artist, we are always improving. And if you learn with, like Carina was saying, like one book has flattened text that's rich black versus the next one, you can compare, and that improves possibly your artistic influence and file preparation for your next project. So it's just all about that dialogue and keeping stuff as clear with your contracted peoples as possible, because there's nothing worse than a unanswered email because you don't know how to tell the person, like, so your text, so this is gonna take me a little longer. So always be happy to talk with people.
So much of it is about just checking in with people and making sure. Carina, it's good that you brought up these different modes that you're talking about too, because I wanted to talk about the fact that you do have a good amount of experience at a few different publishers. You have design work that is some of the most expressive out there, I would argue, just holding up some of the work like Chromatic Fantasy, among others, while still being super accessible at the same time. I'd love to hear more. I'd love to hear you kind of elaborate more about the design philosophy that you have, both like in a commercial sense and what you're talking about with individual artists, and what that thought process is for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I've worked at a bunch of different houses with varying levels of control and varying levels of what should be prioritized as like branding or what is appropriate for like an age group. But my thing that is kind of true across all of my work is that my ethos is very like the story comes first. And I think there are some designers who are very good. I want to be very clear, are very like great designers, great like production people who very clearly, I think, leave their mark on the book. And you can tell that like this person designed this book. But for me, I want my work to sort of disappear into the art and the story and feel sort of intrinsic to the themes and the tone of what the artist is doing. And I want my choices to feel unique to what the book is trying to communicate. At the same time, I appreciate the folks who are like very designer first, and I love getting like a credit or a shout out in like a social post. But for me, I'm really happy with just like the copyright page credit, and nothing else is needed. Like I think I truly believe this. The artists and the writer and like the actual creators of the story are the real heart and soul of the book, and I'm just helping them uplift their vision. And I think that all of my best creative work comes from working very directly and very collaboratively, where I'm like, we're having a conversation about what is going to look like, what print effect is going to be the best for this artwork, or is like a design choice that like you said with Chromatic Fantasy, like with the fact that it has the gold edges makes it feel like a Bible, and that makes sense with like the themes of the book itself. And like having that dialogue and an opportunity to like have a back and forth is what really like feeds me. So yeah, for me, it's just like my choices feel like they need to be specific to the story first, and I'm really happy just to like disappear into that for each book.
Yeah, I think that's a good, you frame it very well. Also, if I may, Chromatic Fantasy,
Thank you.
wonderful
I mean,
book.
again, like I'm
Example
saying, like
too.
that's mostly Haze. Like
Yeah, well,
you
no,
know,
and you make a good point too with, like our work is a lot of times like in service to the greater like comic. Like our job is to uplift the art that we're putting onto a physical canvas. Like you can have, something, you can have a painting as gorgeous as something like the Mona Lisa. Oh yeah, there we go. There's that beautiful red foil. Skin you're in, magnifique. But the biggest thing I like to kind of compare it to this, you can have a piece as gorgeous as something like the Mona Lisa, this incredible, stunning piece of art. And yet, if it's surrounded by a frame that disservices either its quality or majesty, people are going to notice, and it's going to take away the experience of reading this book. And even if that doesn't immediately register in terms of like, design, to you are putting the comic onto a page in both a physical sense, taking it off of that digital screen and putting it onto a physical iteration that reflects that design. And the design itself is supposed to, that is in subservience to it. So sometimes that's genuinely, I agree, like the best feeling that that your design ethos was able to merge or complement the contents of the book itself. That is truly the greatest compliment, where it's like, oh, this is, the artist just really laid this all out. And if they say that, that means my job is done. That is the best compliment you could get, where it's like the entire rest of this feels organic to the book.
yeah,
So,
yeah, that's so well put. It's like it should be like our job is to remove any friction in the reading experience, essentially.
yes.
And my hope is that everyone just thinks the artist did everything. And it
Yeah.
all feels like, it's a piece of the whole thing. And I'm like, good. That's,
Yeah.
yeah, that should be the feeling you get. And then you
Exactly.
check the copyright and you're like, oh, someone else helped. I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah.
We did that there.
I 100% agree. It's very much trying to make the best possible version of the book that you can make out there in terms of
Yeah.
the design process. It makes a lot of sense. And making sure that the vision that the artist is setting out to do comes across. I think it definitely shows in both of y'all's work. And talking about the like cohesion there, I do want to talk about, because you have this experience as well as being this kind of like, Swiss Army editor, as you've talked to me about for Iron Circus.
Yeah.
You also do your own like developmental editing work with your own micropress for Fortuna, as well as freelance and everything. Do you feel like your design philosophy changes when you're going into that like creative control and you're kind of looking at the big picture of a piece, not just from like a design standpoint? Do you feel like, is there more of a push to keep pieces cohesive versus like preserving the style of each comic if you're like, doing a larger anthology or something like that?
Yeah, I definitely say so. Like getting, it's very important to study uh other works that have come before you, either in terms of influence or like assistance, that helps, draw inspiration from your works that you've done into what is going into this book. For example, one of the things that I co-edit for Almost Real, or for Fortuna Media, uh is called the Almost Real Speculative Biology Zine series, and that is much very taking like inspiration from latter 90s encyclopedia entries that have those beautiful full page illustrations with the captions, or even zoo books, which I still believe should be collected one day because they are an important chapter in modern design history, but that's a conversation to have another day. Zoo books, really taking inspiration from like how they did their layouts, studying like even textbook, like I've had the chance to do like essay books or history books, seeing how they're laid out, not for complete cribbing of their, design works and how they've done things, but it's, if you're trying to capture an era's style or feel or whatever genre that you're working in, it's even, when artists have been recently very clearly saying, yes, please provide us some sort of either reference or like, even if it's just a janky ass like sketch, that is so helpful, to even give artists like, when you're creating a book, to tell people like, oh, I really love this book, and I feel like the themes and everything could really work for the style of it. And like, absolutely, I love seeing the stuff that inspires you, because guess what? It also inspires me. Or like, one example I have recently for the Iron Circus published Worst Journey in the World Volume 1 by Sarah Arias. I have a really wonderful opportunity when I took a trip to the UK to visit the Scott Polar Museum, which catalogs all these old different textbooks and biographies, journals, and everything. And I was able to visit there before I began production on this book, to see a first edition, second printing copy of the original textbook that it was printed from. So seeing that oh God, it was so cool. Ugh. But like seeing the way that they laid out that text in there, as per the style, that like specific era of typographic layouts and everything, helped so much when it came to handling the note annotations and other footnotes in that book. So yeah, it is absolutely fantastic seeing like getting your mind into whatever medium that you're going to be steeping in for this work. So I absolutely think it's imperative that you really set aside the time and engage with other books of either that genre or medium, because it's not you. I think unfortunately there's a, not tendency, but fear of people like, looking at other materials out of, not plagiarism, but like, oh, did I take too much from this person's stuff? Or, is this like, am I cribbing too much off of it? And it's like, there's nothing wrong with inspiration. Inspiration is, what makes you want to tackle this work, and, what makes you want to enter in your own earmark of that specific genre. So I just always, very much encourage people to learn or even seek out books that they might not immediately clock as something that can design, like inspire them design wise, but somebody still had to lay out that book. Somebody still thought about that process, no matter how bare bones it is. So I just always very much recommend like collecting books and looking at their pages and seeing what you enjoy and what inspires you for that part of bookmaking. So
yeah, use bookstores, like library sales. There's so much to be found in like books published before the internet. Essentially, like old clip art books are such a treasure trove of design and like what spot art can be and how it can be used, and like kind of taking those like analog ideas and applying them in sort of like the new way that we design books is, I think, a lot of the fun of,
oh yeah
of this job.
Like I think one of the most wild ones was I had a client who published it's kind of like the oral history book, similar if you've ever read World War Z. It's an oral history of We Have Engaged the Borg, which was the Best of Both Worlds, the Next Generation two-parter episode. And I found one of the best reference books ever, which was a computer manual, like telling you about the basics of computers and how the internet worked. But if it was from a Star Trek The Next Generation in-universe like history book about the internet at that time. It is one of my favorite books because it's such a weird little niche in publishing that I don't know if we'll ever get again in popular science fiction, but I'm glad it exists. Oh, it's such a great book. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. And only I found it at a used bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I will definitely be asking you for that link later.
it's such a cool little book.
Just the typographic design on that.
Yeah.
God, on that stuff alone. Yeah, it's so, yeah, having a like a vision in mind, I feel like is truly always a great thing. Always so exciting to see from an artist or bringing that vision out from what they've brought in. I think that's neat. Lovely. I do want to make sure that we're kind of grounding this conversation in the, as you've both talked about, the labor that goes into design and pre-press, whether that's research or, like these conversations or the actual, layout work. I would love to have, if either of you can speak more to, how much time you actually end up spending on, layouts, typesetting, cover treatment. It's, I'm sure the answer is going to be, it depends, but
Who was keeping the timer or the tracker?
Do books largely stay with you, once there's in the design phase before getting sent to print? What is that, how long are you holding on to them?
Yeah, I mean, for me, yes. So, like, typically once a book goes to me, I'm like the last person who has it before it's like sent to the actual printer. And thus, because of that, any time in a schedule that is lost earlier is then compressed into the time that I have at the very end. Yeah. So this is typically something that's like more of a problem with like my commercial jobs, where it's like the book is being worked on for like 2 years, and then I have like a week to do everything at the very end. That's like a worst case scenario, but it hasn't not happened. But yeah, so yeah, typically I'm the last person, and the labor really varies. Like, as we've talked about, it depends on the project. But if we've done our job well and have been given the opportunity to do our job well, hopefully very little time is actually spent on the pre-press, and we get to spend a lot of time on the more creative design output stuff, and like that's where the real hours go in. However, I will say a lot of the most satisfying work I have found is in sort of the puzzle solving, problem solving of like getting something that has not been formatted correctly at all to work for print. And I'm just like very proud of myself internally, because it's like no one will ever know that I received 72 DPI JPEGs and this looks good still somehow.
They look this good, yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely want to make time. Hi, I'm sure you have thoughts. I definitely want to make sure we have time to let y'all talk about some of those examples, because I'm sure you have plenty. But hi,
I've seen some. What's that? Blade Runner. I've seen files the likes of which you've never even dreamed. I've seen TIFFs that have like a crunchy, but yeah, I think, gosh, in terms of time, it real again. I'm putting another thing on the depends counter, but my biggest uh my biggest comment on this is that sometimes, no matter how well you think you might be able to, fortify either yourself or by your skills, there is always going to be something, or not always going to be, but sometimes there is a factor that you might not have accounted for that requires you to tread back in on previous pages that you've worked on, or even like the revision process can sometimes take up a lot more time than you expected. Like I had this one book that I thought I'd done a really wonderful job in terms of like color correction, preparedness. And then I get it back and the testing color, even if they were like digital plotters, which there's a difference between your full color test on the final stock versus just the digital plotters that they gave you, we're looking a little dark. And I had to message my plant back, be like, hey, I'm seeing, and this also requires a good dialogue with your printer to like, sometimes I will even say something even more important than the inherent color settings on your files. It's more important to know what your printer's export requirements are, because that is going to be the file they directly feed and convert into their own machinery and plant process, so really ensure that your dialogue, if you're, doing this alone, you have a communication with your printer that exactly what they need. And that's even beyond just like crop marks, exporting thing. And that's a whole other, detailed conversation. But it's also important to keep a relationship with your printer, and find out what they also need alongside. If your prepress person is not either there or, is like, okay, my work here is done, goodbye. But yeah, I just think it really depends like per project, because there are some people who like lay out their files in an InDesign canvas and it's like, here you go, have fun, color treating this. Or there's some where you just get the art files and they don't know what goes into a credits page, or like even, sometimes I'll have to ask them, be like, hey, what are some elements that you might want on the interior title page or like the credits page? And that's also part of the earlier dialogue that we were all talking about, where it's, having that process with the artist. Because sometimes there's like pages that they don't even consider in the bookmaking process. And as a result of you, as the pre-press person asking that question, you have then enhanced the book's experience that much better, because now they know to fill out this part of the book with this extra element, or like even us, I've had to like extract cover elements of just like the main title and then convert that into, like a vector shape. So you just have that for later on, whether they might need it for promotional purposes or just to go inside the book again. So there can be like road bumps that sometimes you don't expect that add further onto that process. Like I'm trying to think, I got a book one time where the client was like, hey, so we realized it would be more cost effective to make the book a half-inch bigger all around. Is that going to add up onto time? And
No.
yeah,
No.
that's it. It is much more that it certainly is just a single correction in your document settings, but the implications that could have book wide for your bleed margins, your, the way that you've arranged your type, because a lot of that, I kind of compare it to working from a Jenga tower backwards, if that makes sense, because you have all the elements that the artist has given you, and rather than taking out pegs, and seeing how long that you're constantly trying to rearrange them and make the book work in terms of a design, print compatibility and legibility layout. Because even then there's sometimes art books that I've received where it also requires, I know Joan, you asked me earlier about like the Swiss Army knife. It's a thing of wanting to also design the book so it flows better, so it can be, process factors like that. If I'm given a book, can sometimes add on a big chunk of time, because there's some projects where I can spend 4.5 hours either color correcting or cleaning up a piece, or another 4.5 hours can be like, well, I'm having difficulty rearranging these 6 elements on a page, and now I'm stuck here trying to think if this page would go better after, a certain chapter header or not. So I'm adding to the it depends counterboard again, but it really does. And a big advice I have is just to always allow yourself more time if possible, because it makes everybody happier in the end. You get a better book as a result and more time to review things too. So.
And there's a lot of stuff that is sort of just like outside of your control. and that's okay. Like
It's
a couple
fine.
years ago, because of like environmental factors, like all the glue was bad in the world.
Bluegate.
So like a lot of books across different publishers were like having like unbinding problems. And there was, I don't know if anyone noticed this. There was like a couple years ago, like many publishers were like dealing with a lot of returns of like books literally falling apart.
Yep.
And that's not anybody's problem that they did. It's just like the environmental factors were at play of like maybe it was too hot in these specific countries where they were literally binding those books. So it's like you can do as much as you can. And it's like Hai said, it's good to like have a good relationship with your printer, because literally different printers are just going to do a different level of like attention and like care. So like I will even say like sometimes I will like for in general my Scholastic books I've had the most like pre-press attention on them. But I don't know, some of those printers, I'm like, it doesn't look that good. And I can't really control that because like the contracts are what the contracts are. Yeah. Whereas like I have a relationship with like these small presses where I'm like the contact with the printer and I know exactly what paper to use and we've used them and like just the quality is better. And that's just whoever like the actual tech that is on hand, like literally watching the paper come out of the machine, that person just might be a better person. So like, yeah, it all depends. It all depends.
God, I'm glad you mentioned Bluegate because it's spoken about in whispers between people who are only in this very specific part of the industry are aware of, but it was just this weird side effect of that accordion catch up from Prepress from that whole, the pandemic induced backlog that people had for production. And that's what happens when your storehouses of glue just kind of sit there and aren't being used. It's like, oh, turns out that pages don't stick together again.
Yeah, the glue's sitting, so then it's sitting in a warehouse where who knows what weather is happening. And anyway, fun fact for everyone.
Rifa in chat says it's like trying to re-solidify melted chocolate.
That's
yummy.
not inaccurate.
Yeah.
Gluegate was definitely a thing, and then having to get new samples sent out for everything. A fun side effect of the world we live in. I want to make sure we get time to this has all been amazing. So glad to be chatting with y'all. I want to make sure we get time for folks if there's audience questions, because I see some that have already come in through the chat. So if folks want to either type thoughts that you have in the chat, or if you want to go ahead and raise your hand for a moderator to unmute you to hop on mic. And make sure you say your name if you're hopping on mic for stream. And we'd love to hear from you. We've got a first question starting off. Thoughts on converting scroll format to ready for print? How would that work? And that's from Danielle. Thank you, Danielle.
I think you've maybe done more of this, but so I'll let you speak first.
I've never been able to like do a full project from print to like the scroll format to print, unfortunately. Not out of me not wanting to do it, but because the project itself was monumentous in the work that it would require. And the person who initially made the choir on behalf of the publisher was not unrealizing like the amount of time but because you are also building page layouts is the thing. And that's something that the artist, like the comic artist, typically on a not scrolling format, that's the first thing that they lay out thumbnail wise or, page construction wise is layout, yourselves is a undeniable infrastructure requirement in comics. And in order to get from like, say if it's, I'm going to use the example of like a single panel scrolling way, that is requiring not only the pre-press person to update the text into a printer friendly format and possible proofreader friendly format, making sure all the files are CMYK compatible. That is also building an entire comic page. So that is a additional artistic resource expenditure that you not only need to figure in for time, but also how much you're fairly compensated for. So, books that can add up, these huge single page chapters that can end up to like maybe 24 pages. How much effort is that requiring to take all of that and put it into a single page that is not only print format, but it also reads well? Like when I was doing tester pages for this, that required me like making interstitial cuts on the comics. That required me like trying to figure out like, okay, this is the sequence in this ordering. Like, how am I going to fit all these panels together? Like, it's one of those projects that I really wish I could have seen through on multiple occasions, but that would have easily been a year's work of just how much. So my biggest offering for like from scrolling into like single page ready to print methods, very much consider how you would put all of those panels together into what were we both saying beforehand? You have to know the rules before you break them. And I believe that also counts for paneling as well, layout wise, artistic hierarchy, text flow, especially. So that's just my biggest, and it's something that, comic artists nowadays are running into an issue when it comes to printing, because you can have a single page per, you can have a single panel per page. That's not very cost effective nor spacious. You're going to have an 800-page book that only has a single frame per page. So, and that can work for some comics, but certainly not all of them. So,
yeah, I feel like I think in the ideal situation, like that's like a true like collaborative creative project, essentially,
yes.
wherein you trust your designer who is going to basically relay out everything, and you're also like prepared for a lot of work as the artist to like add bleeds and like add artwork that just wasn't present before. If you're going to have like perhaps a page where there's like in the previous layout it was like panel panel panel, then like illustration that scrolls, and then maybe in print that is like the illustration that scrolls like on the right hand of the page with like the over, and then there's the panels overlapping it somewhere in a configuration on the same page. And like, but is there enough bleed? Is it cover, there's so many factors, but hopefully it's really something that makes sense if you have a lot of time and you're willing to put in a lot of effort to like make something, I think, that is equally as good as its original format. I have more experience working in sort of like neo webcomic formats where it's just like, where it's not scroll, where it's like something else that the artist chose to do, and like we format that for print. But yeah, it's not impossible, but it often will come at the cost of like a publisher doesn't want to bother with the amount of time it'll take, or will just do a bad job. So if it's something that you want to do, I would, if you want to do it well, like how much creative control do you actually have? It would be like one of the first things I would ask about.
Yeah.
Well said. All right, we got a few that we can try and blast through here. Question from Jesse: how do you anticipate the tariff situation relating to tariffs that are currently ongoing with the United States and China, among other countries, situations impacting your work? And that's from Jesse. I can take a little bit of this, just at least this is going to be another, kind of like tack it down there for the it depends counter, where we're at. Hopefully my hand is pointing in the right place. But the last I heard, I believe there is an IEPA exception for books specifically that are traveling overseas as being exempted from tariffs. So my understanding is that, at least for now, is that books, including comics, will have should not be dealing with these issues. But again, that's also going to depend on each printer and if they're following that guidance and how they're if they're going to accept that risk. I don't know if either of you have more to add or.
I mean, the situation is that it is changing and
constantly
could change literally day to day, and there's no way to plan for it, honestly. So it's just like, if you know you're going to print something in the next 2 weeks, what are the standards and the costs at that moment? And that's also why often printers will have you sign a quote that's like, if we know we're going to be ready to go within this time frame. So, but otherwise it's really hard to plan for the future, and you can just do your best.
Yeah, exactly. You just do your best, and like Carina was saying, they usually have you sign like a quote commitment. Like, this is, if you're just getting a quote, it'll be good for usually about anywhere from 30 to 60 days, depending on the printer. If you are committing to that quote, those prices will, like, they have you basically in a price lock until your final files are delivered, usually again within 30 to 60 days. So yes, we are currently at an exemption point with most printed things. The worst part, though, is twofold. One, none of these other extraneous, like, out-of-country printers know how long that those are going to be enacted for. So on multiple occasions, I have had to send emails to the agents that I otherwise have extremely good relationships with, be like, listen, I'm doing my best. I really value the work that you do for our books and other, printed projects together. Just let me know if there's any sort of, because there was a time when the entire print industry was scared that we're going to have 125% on our Canadian books, which Canadian books can sometimes cost lower because of, not only are you paying far, far less for overseas shipping, but also because it's a type of lumber and printing stock that comes specifically from Canada, or they can get exported quicker. So the print world is a many faceted bits and pieces here. Like, I know the biggest problem currently with tariffs, and it's not even anything directly related to our process, but it's a crucial part of books getting to shelves, is that nobody knows who's collecting these tariffs right now.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the ports of Los Angeles, and what they're dealing with, not only a lack of traffic, like, it's something like 40% reduction because now nobody's buying anything. So as a result, that means contracting, like, transport companies are hiring fewer people to get books on those trucks to the warehouses, hence why there might be delays. It's less of the ships being held up at port, but there's literally, just because demand is lowered now, as a result, there's not as many truckers who will be like, I'll take these books from, like, wherever to Tennessee or Washington, wherever they're going. So it's a combination of that, and also figuring out who's even collecting these new tariffs in the first place. So it's a strange middle ground that sometimes pre-press people and print coordinators have to manage, because there are factors that we just straight up, it feels so we say like we don't have any control over, but at least we can be prepared going into this. And just, again, communication with your print representatives or agents is just so important. Like, they can only do so much after a certain point, with, like, attorneys who have to sign waivers releasing customs, like, declaring that, yes, this is in fact 5,000 copies of this book that I signed and ordered for, and I have this dude at the port who will sign to confirm this. There's only so much you can do, but it's just the best fortification you can have is just constant communication and as much vigilance as you can, considering the very up and down announcement there are on tariffs. So
it's a wild world out there, and I'm sure the guidance will be changing days after we talk about it at the least.
Grumble.
I'm gonna try and lump in a few questions together so that we can make sure we get to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
We have a question, some words from Emily. You mentioned DPI, and I heard to print black and white, the best was 600 DPI. Is this true? And a follow-up question about preferences on working with files coming from Procreate or Clip Studio. Is there one better to pass from digital to print? Thank you, Emily.
Well, as far as like DPI, I mean, if you're doing black and white, you can do like 1200. Like,
Yeah.
like that's what you should be doing. in quotes, what you should be doing. However, if you can't for whatever personal reasons, but usually with black and white files, those can be, those will still be pretty small, but
yeah,
600 is good. Still, I'm not recommending this, but 300 is the minimum. So if you must, it's okay. But
400 is like it's like pretty like nice. And if anything, we usually say 400 because it's like a slightly higher above quality, and even if a file could be made bigger in terms of like layer indexing. So 400 I usually say for like my color files, just because it's like, okay, well, if their file's still a little cluttered, at least we've got 400 that's like equating with the size, if that makes sense. So
yeah, that's interesting. I actually do like 450 as like my personal middle ground for file management for like color files. But yeah, it's, if you can do 600 for most things, but if not, you can go to 450. But if you can really do it, go as high as possible, honestly.
Yeah. Although not
well, okay.
Yeah. I know what you mean, but I was just about to say, I had one, I was working for an anthology, and I came upon a story where I started to put the pages in and my InDesign kept crashing. I was
How big were those files?
Weird. It was 1800 DPI.
That's crazy.
Honestly, I was like, I mean, good for you to make sure. I want to see what your computer looks like. Like, it's like one of those ones they used to show on like 1970 sci-fi, where it's just like this tower of computing able to hold all these files. So it was but yeah, following up too on the Procreate or Clip Studio question. That's hard because it's like they're both great programs. They just have these one or two little things about them that save them from being perfect. Like Clip Studio would be perfect if they had a way to export text that made it 100K. If the day that Clip Studio realizes that they could save us a lot of time by, it's just please.
Well, yes, I'm agreeing with what you're saying. There's also like, I need to tell everyone this. There's a known error between text in Clip Studio and Photoshop, wherein if you open a clip file that has been converted to a Photoshop file in Photoshop, it will then nudge your text two nudges up.
I don't know why. Why'd you do that?
And here's the thing. If you open your file in Photoshop, that's going to happen. So so I've worked out a system wherein I can take people's files and like revert them essentially, but these programs don't play nice with each other, so it's just really hard. Like that's why you need to communicate what programs you're using so that the person who is helping you can help you to the best of their ability. Because like I think Clip is a great drawing program, especially for comics. Like it is probably the best one, but its lettering tools are kind of subpar.
Yeah.
For a myriad reasons, and so it's tough to. And then, like I said, with Procreate, like that one, like I was like I said earlier, like you have to work in RGB because it just can't do CMYK. Yeah, so there's a bunch of different factors.
Yeah, Procreate, if anything, just kind of gives you like wonkier like color bent like percentages and everything, not in like a way where it's extremely obnoxious, but it's just like it's silly you did that. Why'd you do that? You back down there. So Procreate is definitely more you have to exert some color like studiousness in the conversion process for that, whereas Clip Studio, I just make your text conversion process easier, please God. So also, I will bring it up in chat just because Nero mentioned it. It's because the way, in regards to why Clip Studio, why their Photoshop might be strange, it's because the way CSP and Photoshop measure the size of fonts is different. CSP does it relative to the size of the page, whereas Photoshop does it relative to the DPI. Makes sense, but that again, it's a example like Carina was saying. These programs don't play nice with each other, and unfortunately, because corporate art programs are the way they are, they will most likely not be playing nice for the foreseeable future. So that's why it's our job to make sure that the page looks as nice as possible. So, and now we know.
Yeah, now we know. It's good to have. Let's see. I'm trying to scroll through for some other questions. Another batch from Jesse that I think can go together. How do freelancers hire someone for pre-press services? Is this considered standard part of a comic editor's role? And I think related, what is the preferred file for publishers to receive final files? I've heard TIFF, but is there a single industry standard? Thank you, Jesse.
As far as file format, it depends. Just like straight up.
Just add it to the counter. That is now on stream.
Like here, like my very first job at Skybound, they only accepted like layered TIFF files, but like that's just how that publisher did it. It can be anything, anywhere. So but layers is the key. So just make sure you have your layers, and that's the most important thing. What was the other question?
Hiring pre-press freelance.
Oh yeah, that's
I mean you do more freelance on the individual. Like I only do it sometimes.
Yeah.
With people I usually have pre-existing relationships with.
Yeah.
However, every now and again I'll be like, I'm open to jobs if anyone.
That beautiful time when you're like, oh, I could have a little extra funny money, and I know this person needs something done. All right, sure, why not? But I can't think of when an editor has approached me for it's usually, and I hate saying it's like, oh, you gotta go out there and find them yourself, but a lot of we are a small populace of the comics world, and if you either just what, honestly, look in your favorite graphic novels and see if there's if you enjoy if there's somebody either under pre-press design or like book pre-press technician or book design, just seeking them out, asking people to who are your colleagues, if you know anybody. That's it. I hate saying it's a name to name basis, because you would certainly like to open it up for more people who would be interested in this sort of work. But I think just because of like the nature of the job, rather than like an illustrator, like a comic artist or an author, it's a lot more like just seeking that. I genuinely can't recall like a time an editor has sought me out specifically on behalf of somebody. It's usually an artist will be like, do you want to do my book? All right, come with me. We're now going to propose our timeline to the publisher themselves. So it's a usual, like, the artist approaches first, and then sometimes their budget is related to the publisher, versus if it's just an individual client, they'll be like, all right, let me charge you for my diagnosis fee of your files, and then from there we figure out budgetary wise. So
yeah, the only time I've like been reached out to by an editor was like because Sloan Leong was editing an anthology, and but they're an artist, so they were reaching out to someone who knew what they were doing better. There are so many alarms going off on my street right now. I apologize. But yeah, I mean, what Hai said, look at who is credited there, and we were actually saying this before the meeting. There's only a few of us, so you'll see names begin to repeat actually quite often.
We'll see them around.
Yeah. There's lots of folks, especially in the publishing space and for like self-publishing work that like do pre-press tech, but like don't necessarily work in that space. So yeah. And if you're looking to find those people, you might want to consider joining the Cartoonist Cooperative. That's our prerequisite plug that we shoehorned in there. And with that, I'm gonna move it to. We just had a good question that I lost. Okay, we got a few that I think we haven't covered from Christina. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for such a cool and thorough discussion. Question for absolute design beginners. What is the best DPI? I think we got that. Bleed size, margins, file format, color space, etc. you like working with just as a baseline. And you briefly touched on text and doing 100K black as a separate layer. What does that mean, and how would we optimize our prepress files for a comic? Thank you, and sorry for the length. Not that long.
Never be sorry for asking these sort of questions, because they help everybody in the long run, you know? So I think, so for my DPI, again, we'd say both 400, 450 for color files as a baseline, 600 and up, ideally for black and white. And if you can do color, nice, as long as your computer can handle it, because sometimes literally it's just a matter of computational ability for that. Bleed size, I found that usually anywhere between 1/4 inch and 0.125 is what most printers will accept. Is that pretty universal for you both as well?
Yeah, it's always been, honestly, it's always been like 0.125 inches or 3 millimeters for folks who are not in the inches system. But I mean, but you might need more bleed if you're doing like a hardcover, which typically has like a 0.75 inch like wrap.
Yeah, and even then that depends, like if you're doing like the hard edges versus if you've got NP, because I had one printer who was like, yeah, can you give me an inch worth of bleed on the hardcover? So
that's wild.
Yeah.
Why?
So I just really wanted to rep that shit around. I'm like, okay, sure. Well, here's my best friend of the clone stamp tool. So
and then color, like again, like I used to be, before there were as many programs as there are now, I'd be like just work in CMYK, but now the programs are like very specific to like what they can do well.
Yeah.
That I think it depends on your program, and then you should know if you're going to print something that you shouldn't go too crazy with your neon greens and blues unless you know you're going to be able to do like a spot color down the line.
Yes. Yeah, spot color, just make sure you understand, separating the colors from your channels, and your layers as well. So even if you do have your channels separated, there's not that duplication effect on like what is black and white versus what the color, picking up as versus overprint versus I just want this splash of color. So
yeah, but then also there are like some printers now that like do accept RGB files, so it's it's so, again, it's so situation specific.
Yeah.
It is ultimately going to be a question of talking to your printer and seeing like, what files are they actually asking you to export, making sure what their standards are, because you're obviously figuring out a general format is going to be good for like making sure your files are mostly print ready. But if your printer is likely going to have some specific specs that will change all of that as well.
Yeah.
See, I think we have time for maybe 2 more quick ones before our brains melt. Let's see. I'm making a comic where I do think about page turns and whether a page will be on the left or right, but have I played myself by not giving those pages larger gutters / margins on the binding side, even though it'll be a thicker, higher page book? And that's from Cody.
This is actually my #1 pet peeve in printing. This is the thing I always check when I open a book. I'm like, they didn't leave enough space for the gutter. Yeah. You gotta have extra space. And so it's like when it's an interior interior safety, I always try and do like 0.5 inches away.
Bump that shit over.
Yeah. To have your panels, 0.5 away, just so that your legibility is maintained. Because if you make it the same as your bleed on the other side, often you lose words that are getting just sucked into the gutter in the middle.
Yeah. Or even like text safety too, where it's like even if you do have that, the text is all the way over, in the corner of, or like in the very middle of the gutter too. So while you can see the art, it's almost illegible, or you're like breaking the poor book's spine trying to, get in there and read what it says. So for my templates that I make for either Iron Circus or like other Fortuna books, I always have like, you have the bleed line, the trim line, the like safe zone, and then text safety zone, where it's like this is where all of your stuff, and it's taken in about, I think, like a half inch or 3/4 of an inch away from either the edge of the page or the gutter. So just because that's, it's going to be safe for your text, and that's where you'll have your utmost legibility area. Sorry, there was a barbecue outside and I didn't realize it was on, and there's just a giant gout of flame behind me. So
yeah, I mean I think that's one of like those secret things that like if you're paying attention to that, it really I think elevates the reading experience in a noticeable way, even for like a person who knows nothing about comics or art, and they'll be just like, oh, I can read the page naturally without having to do extra work of trying to hold the book open wider than it wants to go naturally. And then also by the same coin, I often run into people who and this also happens specifically with a lot of clip studio people, because the way that program works, they make pages where there's bleed all the way around for like single pages, and then they just put those two templates together for like a 2-page spread, not considering that there isn't bleed in the middle of the book, which is not like a problem per se. It just means often the 2-page spread is longer than the actual trim size of the book. So there might just be some unexpected trims on the left and right of the entire spread. Again, that's like not a big problem. Most people don't even notice that, but I'm like, if you're very particular about how you want your book to, like the art to be trimmed, just something to have in mind that like there's only bleed on actually the outside technically, if you're thinking about it that way.
Because otherwise everything is just going to get traded up. Because like what a lot of times I'll do it even in my setup, you have the double page InDesign setup so you can see how those pages look parallel to one another. And this is also another fun factor in the stew that you're cooking of a book. Hardback books are a lot easier to open up and see internally. So I always, move things over slightly just off center anyway, just like by principle, but hardbacks are way easier to open up as such versus not. So but it's whereas soft cover you lose so much visibility in that.
Yeah, hardcovers have like that, what is it, open binding. So I usually will even so like bump it a little bit just because I'm like, just in case.
It's good. It's important. Thank you for that. All right, I think we have time for one more. I know we have a lot of amazing questions coming in that I think we can have folks chat about after, but I think a good question to end on here, as someone interested in dabbling in the design aspects of comics and more involved with lettering on a hobbyist level, what are some recommendations for getting started? Is InDesign the best software for this kind of thing? Or is it just, quote, industry standard? What are some resources to check out? Thank you for your wonderful answers. And that's from Cam. And I will add on to that because I think there's been some talk about like, I think some folks, from their like digital workstation background maybe know more about like, a DPI setup or like, getting your lettering right. But the textile design of getting something to print is maybe something I think folks might not know as much about, if that's something you also maybe have resources for folks who want to know more.
I mean, here's the thing. I have, perhaps I'm just too far down the rabbit hole with this, but I do think InDesign is a great program. It's really good at what it specifically does, which is make books.
Yeah.
And that's why it is the industry standard. And personally, and this is just like speaking to like my history, I've always worked at a publisher who is paid for my Adobe suite, so I haven't had to look into the alternatives. I think Affinity is interesting, and I hope that becomes more of a thing people use. But the problem is like those two programs don't talk to each other, and so I can't really use it in my job. But InDesign is good for specifically printing books, and it has a lot of tools and is a very deep program. So I don't know. That's not the like cool answer.
It's not, but yeah, I know what you mean, where it's like it's it's InDesign. It's built to do one thing, and by God, no matter how much of a dipshit Adobe company is, and they are, it does it. So the main problem is too with like Affinity is because these programs don't talk to one another, you usually like there is no conversion process between the two either. So it's one of those things like if you were going to commit to a program, you unfortunately have to commit to it. And unfortunately, a lot of the and this is by design, partially on Adobe's end too, but they are able to download all the new printer profiles and like color settings as well for like your exports and things. So it's one of those things. It's like it sucks that it's like this, but
I will say
just be very aware what you're using.
Yeah, and however, if you are like completely in a closed system of like you are drawing and self-publishing your own work, definitely try out these alternative programs. Download the Affinity alternative and print the book yourself, because it will export a PDF that you can give to a printer, and it does work very similarly to InDesign. So at least teach you the language of like what the things you should be considering. Like I know I'm pretty sure it has like a links channel so you can like look at everything individually on the file level and see like what its DPI is, what its colors are, and like et cetera, et cetera. So it's definitely worth doing if you know for like a specific project you're gonna have complete control.
Yeah. Very, very well said. I can't wait for Affinity really Adobe to play nice with Affinity if it ever happens. We'll see. And then just if y'all had any resources for like generally like someone wanting to like get more interested in design, like digitally or physically, like where someone would get started.
Reading books.
The How to Make a Comic mini comic by Brianna on Iron Circus. It's available as a PDF. Cannot recommend that one enough.
We were talking about this also before the call. That
it's
actually
a very good
is
one.
The like gold standard of like teaching yourself sort of like Prepress thinking. So much so that I'm like, no one else really has to make this anymore. Like that is it, and you should download it and read it. It goes more in depth than I thought it was going to when I first opened it. It is actually a very good resource that every artist should use. What is it? Let's Print a Comic from Iron Circus, published by Iron Circus, created by Rhiannon Rasmussen Silverstein, who I've never met, but have loved Rhiannon's work.
Rhiannon.
And then like here's like a fun recommendation. Like if you're just curious about printing and you live in Ireland, I don't, but I've been to this place. There's a National Print Museum in Dublin, which is such a treasure. It is like this teeny tiny museum where they have like these old letterpress machines, like every machine that was used for binding before the digital era, they still have, and they're often working, and they need people to train on these machines. And I think everything that you have that was the old way is still the new way, but now we just do it less mechanically.
Yeah.
And if you're like a nerd who loves thinking about type, that's like a really cool resource if you live in that country or nearby countries.
Yeah, wow. I knew about the Sacramento print museum, but I never knew about the one in Dublin.
It's a gem. It is. I
Okay.
was so blown away by it. Like the staff are really lovely and they're also nerds about printing.
Good.
And they're running out of people. Like they're like all these like 80-year-old guys who used to work in these big warehouses with these machines need people to train so that like these, you know, skills don't go totally defunct. So
Yeah.
It's important. Yeah. Those links have been dropped in chat for folks that are following along live. And we'll make sure to get those in the show notes after as well. Thank you so much, both of y'all, for chatting today. If folks want to find you on the internet to ask you some of the other questions we had here, where can they find you?
Blue Sky. That's the only place I am. Otherwise, I'm not on the internet at all.
Me
in any
neither.
other
We got enough work.
capacity.
You and I got enough work to do.
Well, specifically on Blue Sky, they wanted to find your handle.
What is it? She calls me Sea Dog dot whatever the standard is for Blue Sky. That's my handle on everything actually, but I'm only active there. So follow me there if you would like to. Cody, you got me. Thank you.
Yay. And then I am also only currently on Blue Sky. Just social media is a lot. My website, portfolio site is currently down for a combination of renovations and wanting to add more onto said site because I got real busy and there's a few projects that I would like to add onto there. So either Exploding High on Blue Sky or explodinghigh.com once that is up and running once again. So
Hi, I was trying to look up your website and I was like, why is it down?
Yeah, very similarly in progress with my website as well. I feel that.
But my personal website is carinataylor.com or carinadraws.com, which carinataylor.com redirects to because I had the first Carina Draws first, but it's not carinataylorauthor.com, who is just a random lady.
That's a different
books on Amazon.
That's a different, imposter. Wonderful. Well, and if you want to find me for something else, I'm at joandark.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out for this panel. Really glad to have y'all here, and I hope everybody checks out all of the amazing other events we have running for Nib and Inkfest. Thanks so much, y'all.
It's a great festival. Good job, everybody who put it together.
Festival all around. Feasting
upon
this
folks.
festival.
All right. I think our host is trying to get us moving.
See ya.